You'll never not be a successful architect if you have two things. If you have those two things, you're going to be successful. It's not a foregone conclusion that our profession exists 50 years from now. So we all have kind of an obligation to each other and to future generations to do the right thing.
Forth Bagley is an experienced architect and principal at KPF in New York. He's led an incredible career designing and delivering some of the world's most impactful urban projects, including Hudson's Yard in New York and Changi Airport in Singapore. Forth is an expert at assembling and leading large teams to deliver ambitious developments that will continue to define their cities for decades to come. How have you felt the practice has evolved over those 20 years?
Well, there are the things inside of the practice that have evolved. And then there's just like the macro stuff that's happening to you as a firm, as an individual. Like when we started Hudson Yards, the first sketches we did for the area, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet. And then like 10 years later, there's Hudson Yards.
What do you think the audience could take away from your journey in architecture?
I'm not sure anyone should learn anything from me, but I will say the one thing is like...
Forth, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So just as a starter, and a question that I like to ask all the guests, why architecture? What is it about this career that keeps you getting up in the morning, that keeps you coming back for more?
Yeah, I guess it's the same answer that I sort of the reason that propelled me into the profession to begin with, which is just the desire to have an impact on cities, on neighborhoods, on make positive contributions to people's lives. So at a firm like KPF, where the impact is broad and global, wake up every morning and try to do that.
Yeah, lovely. In your sort of early days, what is that sort of route into architecture that you had? What was the upbringing that led you down this path, and the important people that kind of led you there?
I don't come from a family of architects or a family of artists. My mom was a banker. My dad was in the commodities business. But I grew up in England. They're both American, and my childhood grew up in England. And because of my dad's job, we were traveling a lot. Like he was in the sugar business, so we'd go to the Philippines, Hong Kong, parts of all over the world, basically Caribbean, etc. And through his job, got to travel, got to see a lot of cities, got to go through a lot of airports, got to stay in a lot of hotels, and just got the building bug from that. And luckily had parents who were supportive of it, and schooling that supported creativity, and was able to eventually parlay that into a career.
How much? I mean, that's obviously a very sort of novel upbringing that not many of us have, and how much of that has sort of led you to a practice that is incredibly international, that does projects all over the world, and is that kind of an intentional thing, do you feel?
Yeah, it's funny. I look back on it now, and of course it all makes sense. I don't think it was that intentional when I started, but I think the KPF mission of KPF is to make impactful urban architecture, and that's why hopefully everyone comes in every day to the office and is focused. And I think the upbringing of travel with a dad in the business world and an entrepreneurial dad, like I was in he would take me to meetings, he would take me to client dinners. I was very much part of the family business, and it allowed me to have a comfort in boardrooms, which I think a lot of architects don't get that training, actually. And for a company like KPF to be able to walk into a boardroom, be comfortable giving a presentation in front of 20 people, to go out to dinner, if you feel comfort around all sorts of different types of people, not just geographically, Asia, Middle East, Europe, Americas, but also economically, socially, culturally, to just be sensitive to the world around us, which of course you have to be as an architect anyway. But I think particularly as an architect engaged in mixed use, large projects, particularly with lots of corporate clients, you have to have that kind of level of comfort. So, and I look back at it, absolutely makes sense. But of course I didn't set out to do that.
In your early days, I mean, obviously you're a graduate of Yale, and again, that's a prestigious school of architecture. What is an education in Yale really like, leading you to a career in architecture, and what are those kind of key lessons that maybe you learnt at university that you've kind of taken through?
Well, I went to Yale undergrad as well as grad. So when I left London, I moved to the United States to go to university, and that first 4 years at Yale was a liberal arts education. And so and I didn't do architectural design, anything. I sort of stumbled into architectural theory and history as a degree. I was one of 4 people at Yale who graduated with a degree, and I wrote my thesis on airports. So it was in retrospect like a very loose education, right? It allowed me to do to explore what was of interest to me, and so that was a very different experience to my graduate experience at Yale, which was obviously went from a class of 1,200 people to a class of 40. And the Yale School of Architecture program, and it still is to this day, but it was very much rooted in building and like a very pragmatic approach to architecture. I don't think it's an accident that Richard Rogers, Norman Foster, that these guys came out of that school. Like it was every second year at architecture school, everyone builds a house. And so I went from like doing architectural history, theory, like writing about airports, the history of airports, having no business being in architecture design, but kind of coming out right after September 11th, the United States. It was kind of a weird commercial real estate recession. And Bob Stern, the dean, was like, hey, why don't you just stay, go all the way through, can't find a job, become a real architect. And so I was lucky because he was, at that time, he had just started in the graduate school, and he was very involved pedagogically with even the undergrad. So I was very lucky to be kind of floating around this liberal arts education and to be able to be in conversation with the dean and to kind of be able to switch from this loose education to this very pragmatic education. And I do think that Yale School of Architecture, everyone who comes out of there could have been a sole practitioner, right? It basically taught you the fundamentals of running an architecture business, of being an architect and building.
I think that's a kind of fascinating conversation to be had, because I mean, in the UK at least, we have continuing debates about the place of architecture school and the graduates that sort of come out, the value that they can provide and the education that they're receiving. And I suppose the common sort of thought is that university, at least in the UK, isn't preparing people for practice sort of thing. And I wonder whether you could just talk a little bit on that. When talking of Yale, it sounds like they are preparing you for a career in architecture, and you're producing a student that's kind of ready to be molded. So
I thought at its best they were. Of course, now I look back at it and I'm like, oh my God, I wish they prepared people better, right? Like, I think this is a dilemma that all architecture schools face. I think I've seen just over the years, even since I've graduated in the 20 years I've been practicing, the emphasis on the schools change over time. It was a weird, when I went to school, I don't know if this is the same in the UK, honestly, but when I went to school, it was just at the start, like the Guggenheim Museum and the sort of the idea of Frank Gehry and Starchitects and Rem Koolhaas and Zaha. And Bob Stern was bringing these people into the school, like they were teaching at the school. And so it felt like, there's always this push and pull in architecture between the academy and the profession. And when is the action in the schools and when is the action in the profession? And it very much felt like the start of schools recognizing that they needed to engage professionals, actually, that some of the action was happening outside of the academy. And I think as a student, even at the time, we were like kind of aware that was taking place. And I would say maybe this is coming from a very biased place, but I don't see that. I still see a lot of the action taking place outside of the schools, right? Like a lot of what's driving the profession is not, pie in the sky, academic thinking, how to house. I mean, we have an affordability crisis in New York that is just as great a problem as it is in London, is just as great a problem as it is in Singapore. And I don't see any of the dialogue that's occurring in the schools elevating into society. And similarly, I don't see any of the experienced architects or the people in the profession dealing with that either. So it's kind of morphed over. I've watched it kind of morph from when I entered graduate school, and they were, just architects just starting to do museum commissions and things like that. Now they're doing luxury housing, right? So it's been a weird thing to watch, this kind of creep in the profession. That honestly, I hope corrects or moderates a little bit over the next decade.
Yeah. So you've completed your education at Yale, and you come into KPF now. You're 20 years on, a principal at KPF. What is it about? I mean, because obviously there are lots of people that's probably going to be listening to this that aren't going to spend 20 years in a practice, and probably ask that question of what is it about that practice that resonates with you, that the ethos, the original setting up of the original founders, and how they've imbued an ethos into a practice. And I suppose it's about how does that align with you as a person that's made you stay there and become part of, you are part of now the practice.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think anyone sets out to stay anywhere for 20 years when you're in your 20s. But so I graduated from Yale, and I took a job working in Hong Kong, the local company in Hong Kong, building a lot of casino work in Macau at the time, big airport projects, big hotel projects. And Bob Stern, who I mentioned, was furious because it was around that time. Of course, the economy had switched, and people were literally like writing to Herzog and writing to Rem and getting jobs without interviews. Like it was booming. And he was like, "What are you doing? This is crazy." And I said, "I just want to work on big projects." And so I went to the region of the world that was building these big projects. And I liked it. I had a great time. And I was working on two projects at the time. One was a casino, the Venetian in Macau, which was a kind of carbon copy ×4 in scale of the one in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Doing like kit of parts and figuring out how to put facades together. I mean, real, like, not glamorous architecture, but fun. Like, you got a lot of responsibility, and you were in the field building stuff. And then the other project I was doing was I was detailing a KPF building, a retrofit of the landmark in central Hong Kong.
Right.
And so I kind of started, like, I was doing that, and I was working in Macau, and I had my whole life flashed before my eyes, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to end up in Macau and like doing casinos for the rest of my life. This is not what I want. And so I met a partner at KPF, Paul Katz, and I interviewed back here in New York. And my intention was just to get back to New York and admit to Bob Stern that I made this huge mistake, and just to get back and do some work. And this firm that at the time had just finished Roppongi Hills in Tokyo's transformative project in Tokyo. It had just finished the Nagoya train station, this huge mixed use thing. There were projects, and I knew of the work because I was working in Asia and working on their projects. And I went to the interview, and Paul interviewed me, looked at my portfolio. He said, "I know your work. We've been working. You're hired. I'm going to call HR. They're going to give you a call. Like, go downstairs. They're going to call you when you get downstairs. The offer is going to be offensive. You call me, and we'll sort it out." And I went downstairs. I still remember this. Downstairs onto the street. They called me, and like a flip phone, and we got an offer. And then I called Paul. I was like, "This is offensive. This is like the lowest salary. Come on, I know, like, what I'm capable." And then like 10 minutes later, got a call from HR with the revised offer, and I walked right back into the office and started work. And it was like that kind of like entrepreneurial spirit in this huge firm. You would never expect this huge. At the time, it was like 250, 300 people firm to be able to be that nimble and entrepreneurial, right? And so my expectation was I would stay for a year or two and get my feet wet with me, and then figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I just loved the work. I was, going back and forth between New York and Asia, and we were building, I did, as a very young architect, I was getting to work on these amazing projects, Mandarin Macau, and we did 12 other projects in central Hong Kong and Beijing, and the tallest building in Guangzhou, and, just opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Never had time to think about leaving.
Yeah.
And the economy was growing, the firm was growing, and it was a fun place to learn. So here I am 20 years later.
Yeah, sounds like a joy.
Yeah.
How was that transition into management? Because again, we have lots of conversations in architecture about that transition from being a on the job architect, us kind of knowing the ropes as an architect, and then being thrown into being promoted and thrown into management. I mean, it sounds like your upbringing gave you that sort of understanding of the boardroom, as you mentioned, but it must have been a kind of learning curve to kind of understand how to manage people, how to manage a practice of that size.
Yeah, I mean, you're an architect. I mean, I think, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's like the hardest part of my career was that moment where I was both expected to lead a team and do the work.
Yeah.
And it's just
Agreed.
like, how does this even possible? Like, I'm responsible for doing all these drawing sets, and I got to tell these 2 other, 3 other, 4 other, 10 other people what they did wrong, and while I'm making mistakes. I mean, it was the worst kind of couple of years in my life. And I always say to people at KPF, this is the hardest part of your career, and the only way I know how to do it is just get through it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Like, get out above the water and see the lake. And it's just so hard. And then once you get your head above the water, you start to realize things that you thought were really complicated are not, if you break them down in scale and you use analogies to kind of understand how the business runs, you can kind of figure it out. Like I mean, I don't know. I would say like Bob Stern also said to me, you'll never not be a successful architect if you have 2 things: empathy for your clients, because they're taking huge risks. They're defying gravity. They're taking out huge loans. They're putting their wife's jewelry on as collateral. So you got to have empathy. And then you got to have optimism too. Like, you have to convince people to build this 500-meter tall building. You have to convince them that it's the right decision to build office and not hotel, and to make it blue and not yellow. And so if you have those 2 things, you're going to be successful. But of course, it's much more complicated than that. Because you're dealing with creative people, right? And every person in an architecture business is creative, from the accountant down to the, everyone. So, but it is fundamentally a service business, particularly the kind of work that KPF does. Like, it's really like the business model is really no different than like a plumbing business. Someone calls you up to a job, you got to go do it as best you can, as fast as you can, and make sure nothing breaks so you don't have to come back. And they're happy, and they call their friends and they tell you that they tell them to use you to fix the pipes. And so that's how I like approach our business, is like thinking about our business. It's helpful to me to remind me about like the fundamentals of a service business, right? Because sometimes I think when you get in these creative moments and you get caught up in all of the impact you can make, you tend to forget, just at the end of the day, it's a service business. You're a licensed professional and you're servicing a client, right? So it's always kind of important to just remember that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that analogy of empathy and optimism. I
just never forget it. It's like the best advice anyone's ever given.
Yeah, it's wonderful. As a principal, what are the sort of values that you try to lead with? What are the values that you try and imbue into your staff? And like you say, working with creative people, a huge collective of creative people with their own hierarchies in a business like KPF. How is it that you get the best out of them for your clients?
Yeah, I think ultimately, and Gene Cohn, our founder, and Paul Katz used to tell me this, ultimately, as an architect, you are your culture, and your firm is the projects that you win and the build that you build. And so you can get up and you can talk about mission, and you can talk about culture, and you can make 1 million business plans, but if you don't win the work that you want, you don't become the firm that you want. And so I've always been very focused on making sure that, particularly the partnership, is really focused on winning the work that we want, that reinforces our mission, that the partners want to work on, the partners want to engage on, and that feels part of our common core values. And so, you can talk about live, work, balance, and all this stuff, but ultimately we want people to come in every day to work and know what they're working on, but also like why they're working on it. What is the mission of KPF? The mission of KPF is to do impactful urban architecture. We believe in the power of the basic building blocks of an office building, of a residential building, to make a neighborhood better, make a city better, to elevate societies, right? And so if everyone's coming in every day with that in the back of their head, and they see the partners working hard to achieve that, and they hear it enough, and they see it reflected in the work that they're doing, you don't have to say that much, right? Like,
yeah, sure.
It's better to just speak through the portfolio and the work, right? I don't know. That's what I've always, and we're complicated. We've got 27 partners, so we're not a single name. We've founded 3 founders. It's always been a partnership. It always will be a partnership. And so the mission has to be broad enough and important enough that you can collect all these different voices, and they can all have a say in contributing to that mission.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
How do you navigate that? I mean, because obviously with such a sort of international base, and I know you've personally been involved in numerous international projects. What is that sort of navigation process? Because obviously KPF have a presence in numerous geography sort of locations, London and the like. How do you sort of split yourself and the sort of responsibilities?
Yeah, so we have evolved. So the firm is almost 50 years old now. We're on our second, third, fourth generation of leaders. And we've evolved from a firm that was very focused on the US to a firm really, like, geographically, about a third of our work is in the Americas, a third of our work is in Europe and the Middle East, and a third is in Asia. And it's roughly, that's been the kind of target for at least the last 10 years. And really, we've been achieving it over the last 5, like, pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And so the ambition is to be a global firm. We have 2 design centers for those 3 regions. So we're doing design work out of New York, design work out of London, but we've got partners around the world and that are executing that work. And so, yeah, like, we've always felt like limiting the locations where the design work happens to 1, 2, 3 places at most allows us to have common conversations about the intentions of the design. And so what I mean by that is, like, we're not, when we open an office in San Francisco, it's to deliver those projects in San Francisco. It's not so that we have California partners working on California projects, or London projects working on London partners working on London projects. Like, I think the partners have always felt like it's like, I love coming to work and working on a project in Shanghai, a project in Texas, a project in California. And so we've never really wanted to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
But we also want to service our projects and service our clients. And so we have to have a global breadth. But ultimately, every Friday, all the partners sit around a table at lunch every Friday. And we share work and we talk. And you can't do that if you're spread out in too many.
Sure. I think that's one of the, I mean, you pick up on it, the one of the greatest things about being an architect is that variety, and whether that variety comes in location or project type or, stage of project, the actual role of the architect is so broad, and, your experiences every day are completely different, which I mean, personally, I find wonderful. I mean, apart from area schedules, which are terrible.
Yeah. But it's tricky because it's like we don't have sector leads. We don't have geographic leads. Like, we are, the basic building block of our firm is the team. So we purpose build teams for the project, right? And then the project finishes, those team stays with the project finishes, we disband. And so expertise is formed to deliver bespoke solutions to individual projects. There's always two partners on a project, so no one is ever, it's my project. It's always our project. And so we have to do a number of those things to make sure that the culture stays in place. But it is not without cost, right? Like, it would be much more efficient.
Sure.
And it's caused our growth to be slower than maybe some of our competitors, because we don't have a matrix organization where we've got, like, geographic leads driving sector leads, and we don't have any of that stuff. We have conversations and, like, hey, you take that one, I'll take this one. You work with her, I'll work with him. And it's inefficient, but it holds on to design culture when we don't have one like
Hmm.
voice, right?
Would you say that's a sort of value proposition that sets you guys apart?
I think that's where we've put our, for better or worse, that's like where we planted our flag, and
Yeah.
like we're gonna make sure that that's successful one way or the other, right? Like
Yeah.
we've made our bed, we're gonna sleep in it.
Yeah. I mean, your career has obviously been full of, incredibly sort of large, complex, urban-led schemes. Hudson Yard in New York, and the projects you mentioned in Hong Kong and elsewhere. I know you've spoken widely on the sort of collaboration of design teams and have taught on those sort of business ideas as well. I wonder if you just spend a little minute kind of talking around that sort of subject and why that's a kind of interest point for you, and what you see as the sort of important skills of architects in kind of leading those things, in sort of the formation of those things, and really getting the best out of it.
Yeah, we've always felt, at least it's always been told to me, and I sort of always tried to impart it onto others, that like KPF at its best should be a place where you can become the kind of architect you want to become faster and better inside the firm than in the overall profession. And so if you hold on to that idea, and then you think of the basic building block of the firm as being the team, essentially, we're 550 people. It's roughly 100 projects in the office. If you think back to your like primary school education, 100 people in a class, you kind of know 100 people's names, and you've got like 10 people who you're really close with, and then 10 that you're really like, I don't know about. And that's kind of like the way we handle the projects, right? And so each one of those projects, each time we form a team, we're kind of like incubating a small business, right? So you got like 100 small businesses running around the office with accountability for design quality, pride, profitability, all that stuff. That's the thing that creates that's the thing that actually translates on the promise of being a better architect faster inside the firm, right? Is creating that entrepreneurial lust, right? Where it becomes really interesting is you got 550 people globally, you got 100 projects globally. Some projects have 2 people on them, and some projects, we're doing Changi Airport. It'll be the biggest airport in the world. It's got 7 other architects. We're working with Thomas Heatherwick's team. We're working with 4 or 5 other local architects in Singapore. Talk about a small business. That's a medium-sized business. That's for us, that's a 70-person team, right? Or Hudson Yards at its peak was 70 people. One Vanderbilt at its peak, 50 people. Worked on a project, Victoria Dockside in Hong Kong. By far the most complicated project I've ever worked on in my career. At its peak, we had 25 people. Like these are each one of these teams just at KPF are a small business, right? And so that's where it gets kind of great, because you can learn how to run a small business running a 4-person team. Then you can grow, and people trust you, and they'll let you do 2 of those small businesses. And then you grow again, and you get a 10-person team. And then one day you wake up and you're like the project director of Changi, and your design collaborator is Thomas Heatherwick, and you've got 5 other partners from KPF who are also with you running the project. Not 1, not 2, but 5. And it's a small business. And so you learn how to collaborate, you learn how to create shared accountability, shared responsibility. And at its best, it's super exciting, right? Because no one's telling you how to run your job or how to make money. You're figuring it out as you go with smart people who are more right than wrong. And that's what I mean. It's like the incremental growth of a career, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a kind of fascinating way of putting it, and not something that I've kind of heard a principal kind of talk in that way before. Because I mean, obviously, you probably have a lot of young people join the practice, and to kind of map out their career journey like that is, I mean, it's incredibly exciting. It's because obviously it's a hard profession to come into, and we have all the sort of negative connotations of architecture, in the early days of our careers and stuff. But it sounds like an incredibly enticing and tangible kind of route, if you will, for a young person in your practice.
it's hard to make sure that it continues to happen, right? Like it's hard work to make sure that you can create opportunity as the firm grows. You have to continue. You just have to create that much more opportunity.
Sure.
So that's kind of been the challenge at the firm, is really like how do you scale up that opportunity? And we're not always perfect. It's not like a perfect place to work, and no place is, but I think there is a genuine. I see it like Jamie, our president. I see it in the board. I see it in our partnership. Like the partners as a group are pretty committed to making sure that the opportunities that they had and were given by the founders are passed on. And that's a cool place to work. It's a nice place to make a career.
Yeah. In terms of the scale of the projects that you're working, I mean, you mentioned a team of 2 to a team of 70. What is it about? I mean, you mentioned earlier that, large projects get you excited. What is it about the scale, the complexity, the location, if you will? What is it about those types of projects that kind of entice you? And even with their sort of complexity, their numerous stakeholders, their bureaucracy, and all the sort of negative parts.
Yeah, I think I've always been okay with delayed gratification. Like our career is like it's so hard to be an architect today, practicing today. And I have so much actual empathy for particularly like our younger staff, and for precisely the people we talked about, the people who are doing the work and telling and kind of trying to organize the work at the same time. Because if you were doing an apartment renovation, you're in and out in 6 to 12 months, and it still doesn't compete at all with the internet. It doesn't compete at all with the iPhone and all this sort of like instant gratification, but it's a year of your life. Like Changi Airport, I was there we started that job. For the first phone call we got on Changi, right, was my daughter's was born, which is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We won the project 7 years ago when my son was born. I was in the hospital room. We got the call. So I'll never forget like those milestones.
Sure.
When we open the project, my kids won't be living in my house. Right? Like it is like, not only will I have helped bring this building into the world, I will have like nurtured 2 adults into the society. So it's like you have to be super comfortable with taking the small wins, like every day, taking the small wins. And then just being super grateful that you work in a place where there are like lots of people, like 70 other people who are coming to work, working harder than you every day on all aspects of the project, right? Like that, like one of the great things about KPF, I'm sure it exists in your practice and other practices, is just like, if you don't want to do something, there's always someone at KPF who does want to do the thing you don't want to do. Who thinks of architecture exactly like you mentioned Excel, right? Or area schedules. Like there's 10 people walking around here. That's all they love, Excel. Right. And like, so that's kind of the fun realization, is that like there's lots of, you go into architecture school. I had a classmate. We were like choosing it. It was my first year in architecture school, and I was like really struggling with like how to be a designer, coming out of this theory, history background. And there was this chair class, and it was like a chair design class. And I remember saying to her, I said, Jaron, like, I really don't want to take this class. Like, I don't have any chair that I want to build. Like, I design, build, like, and she was like, Forrest, you're an idiot. Like, not every architect has to design a chair. Like, just don't be that kind of architect. Like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh yeah, like I don't have to, there doesn't have to be a fourth Bagley chair in the world, right? It's for me to be an architect. And like, I feel that way about KPF. Like, we're all doing different kind of people on a big project. And as long as people are becoming the kind of architect that they want to be, and we're covering everything, everyone's going to do a better job becoming the person that they want to become, rather than having to support something. So on a big project, you don't have to do everything. You can really like become that architect and drill down. And so I like that. And it's fun to be in a place like that where you can collaborate with other architects and not just inside the practice, but outside of practice. It's lovely. It's like a wonderful thing, especially if you had a career for 20 years in the same office to
Mhm.
get to have ideas from Thomas Heatherwick and get to have ideas from A61 and RSP and Sorbonne, all these other firms that we're collaborating with on Changi, and not to mention, Hudson Yards or Victoria Dockside. We had 100 different design practices working on one project.
Wow.
Even like if you just are a sponge for those ideas, it's amazing, right?
Mm.
So exciting. Just get all of that. It's just like graduate school on steroids.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
How have you felt the practice has evolved over those 20 years? Obviously you've been part of it and part of, the team kind of steering that. I mean, obviously scale wise has radically changed, but what are the things that continue and what are the things that have changed?
Well, there are the things inside of the practice that have evolved, like going from, having the founders very involved in practice to not. It's obviously a sea change in any design culture, right? And there are the things about going from when I joined, I think there was a London office and a New York office, and maybe they just started Shanghai. And then I was sort of helping Hong Kong, and now we've got Singapore and Seoul and San Francisco and like all these other. So there's all that stuff. And then there's just like the macro stuff that's happening to you as a firm, as an individual. Like when we started Hudson Yards, the first sketches we did for the area, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, right? And then like 10 years later, there's Hudson Yards.
Sure.
Or when we started working in Covent Garden, the iPhone hadn't been invented. Divination of Covent Garden. There was no way for us to anticipate the societal changes that technological invention would bring to the world. And yet we were still coming to work every day and designing a building and documenting a building and getting those buildings built while these other things were changing. And, it's impossible to be engaged in the act of like city building without feeling the enormous pressure of, I don't know what you call it, like deglobalization, right? Like the first 20 years of my career is everything was in the service of connecting the world and seamlessly and growing our practice and making sure that our teams in Hong Kong were totally synced with our teams in New York and London. And now we live in this world, this like fragmenting world. And that's not our firm. That has nothing to do with the kind of culture that we're trying to build in our firm, but has everything to do with our future, right? And probably everything to do with us as individual architects building buildings, wanting to build buildings in China, wanting to build buildings in Europe and South America. So it's just like when you start your career, you have just no idea that these things are going to happen. You can't imagine.
Yeah, sure.
I can't even plan for tomorrow,
How do you plan for tomorrow then? What are you planning for tomorrow?
We've done, it's like we do business plans after business plan after business plan. And at least since COVID, everything is wrong. It's just like everything is backwards, right? So it's just, we've sort of like given up trying to guess and estimate and, and it's tricky. Like we had kind of like 2 years into COVID and we realized 100 out of the 500 people that were at KPF had never stepped foot in our office. And it's like, how do you talk about a culture of a firm when that's going on, right? And then suddenly they all come back and it's like freshman year and everyone's meeting each other. And what is that? That's like a whole new culture, right? So I do think all these macro events are really, I think like architects tend to view of themselves as the center of the universe. But really, like, we're really agents of societies that are changing. These changes are being mostly forced on us. Right? Yeah. One of the pieces of advice that Gene Cohen gave me before he passed, maybe this is like 10 years ago now, was, a lot of architects see their careers, they see themselves moving in their careers, like stepping up junior to a associate to a director to an owner, and they don't imagine that the practice that they're working on is also evolving. The people that are sitting to either side of them are also doing the same thing and going in different directions, right? So you can have all the best intentionalities about the architect you want to be, and the stuff around you can be doing something totally different. So it's just about finding a place where your mission, your personal mission, is synced with the articulated mission of that firm, and the quality and the quality of the portfolio that firm is trying to create. Right.
Yeah. We spoke earlier about Yale and your sort of your education there. I know you've sort of continued that relationship into your sort of later career. I know you've had work published there, and you've gone back to teach as well. How important has that been in your career, having that, retaining that connection, retaining that sort of the connections with your sort of peers from that time as well, and that sort of ongoing relationship between practice and education?
Yeah, I mean that stuff is like foundational, right? It's sort of like your first kindergarten class where you're learning to socialize. Like I found the first year of architecture school is almost the identical process of like figuring out how to be an architect around other architects. And so it's foundational, it's memorable, you're making relationships that last. And I am committed, to the school and to continue my involvement in the school. I would say like equally as important, if not more important, is just getting out into the world, like talking to people on airplanes, reading books that aren't about architecture, friends that aren't architects, having clients that you can go on vacation with and learn from. And so it's like, it's important because the school provides a safety net and a foundation from which you can build your career. But in order to grow a practice, in order to grow as an individual, you also have to like make new friends, right? And read new books and stuff like that. So try to recommend to people in the practice that they also do that. Like when we down in Texas, I'm like, talk to the person next to you. You never know who's sitting next to you on an airplane, right? Like I don't know if they had these like squishmallow things in England, but they're, I ended up on a British Airways flight from London to Miami like a couple months ago, and I sat next to the inventor of the squishmallow stuffed animals. Oh
yeah, no, my daughter's got one. Yeah.
And it's like if you don't talk to the guy, you never meet him. And it's a hugely interesting guy, and it gets you like that much more engaged in the world around you. And so I don't know. I think that's just as important as the school to me. It's just like making new friends.
Yeah. No, I think that's fascinating. I mean, I always have the conversation out of my sort of peer group. I think I'm the only one that didn't marry an architect. My wife is the least architecting sort of person you'll ever meet. I just have very fun memories of dragging her around Paris, pointing at different buildings, and her sort of considering divorce at a sort of early point. Sort of
I feel like that's super important because you have to have. It's super important. I do that with my wife. I'm like, that's a KPF building, and she's like, And then you're like,
exactly.
Now I know. Like, I'll try harder on that one. It's like good. It's like good to have that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if you're just talking to architects about architecture, it all gets a bit navel gazing, doesn't it?
Right. And then the other thing is like, of the 40 people I graduated graduate school with, very few of us are still architects. It is a graduate program that spawns all kinds of careers in furniture making and real estate development and all sorts of other avenues. And so I found it's actually important to stay in touch with those people because there's very few of them actually, still practicing architecture. And you do need advice all the time, right? Because you're constantly finding things you've never encountered before.
Why do you think that is? Is it just because of the education gives you a sort of broad design understanding that gives you the tools to do those things, or is it the dissatisfaction in the profession, or a bit of both? Maybe, I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the education I don't want to say predetermines, but the education curriculum assumes that not everyone's going to become an architect because the people who are teaching it have gone through that process themselves and have, I always I obviously gravitated towards a program that was focused on building. And even inside of Yale, I was very focused on the professors who had built buildings. right?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
just intuitively was drawn to those people more than the others, and maybe that's because I came out of this other undergraduate background, but and I find myself to this day attracted to architects who build. Like I'm
Mm.
interested in talking to other architects who have found ways to build buildings. And certainly like at KPF, like everything at KPF is in the service of good design, but also in good design that gets built and executed.
And I saw recently that your involvement in Open House in New York, which I wanted to talk to you about, because obviously in London we have the Open House scheme as well, and I think it's very well loved by a lot of Londoners and particularly architecture students. I wonder what your thoughts are on the value of things like that in communicating, what good design is to the public, how people kind of relate to that, how people understand what architects do, and to the point you make about your wife, how people sort of appreciate or not appreciate good architecture.
Yeah, I mean I'm really excited to be on that board, to be asked to join that board. It is an organization which transcends way beyond architecture. Mission really to like celebrate the opening up of buildings to the public, and for me it's like a perfect alignment with the career I've tried to build and the firm that all of us in the partnership are trying to build at KPF. The mission of KPF, which is to like use buildings to elevate the urban experience. And so, it's the board that I'm on. It's an organization I'm totally committed to, because I just think that that the festival nature of Open House, this like joyful celebration of opening up the doors of all these buildings to the city, is it's just it goes so much further beyond architecture and into real like issues of public accessibility and what it means to live in a physical neighborhood, in a physical city, in today's digital world where we're just bombarded by images of buildings and stuff like that. And just the act of like opening a door, right?
Yeah.
But like opening multiple doors at the same time, to me, just so excited. And as an organization at KPF, I think we're really committed to those types of multidisciplinary, publicly, outwardly facing organizations. We're obviously involved, many of my partners involved in the AAA and more professional organizations, but organizations like Open House, the Urban Design Forum, the NLA in London, ULI, CTB, Council for Tall Buildings, Urban Habitats, these organizations which try to bring the built realm to the people are organizations I'm personally excited about. And Open House has just been an amazing, so far it's been an amazing experience, and really I'm just totally thrilled to be able to like help push that organization forward. I wish that there were more communication actually between London and New York and Mexico City, Hong Kong, and that's something I think over time, hopefully, I'm hopeful that the organizations can kind of do more of, because the idea of these festivals that are just popping up around the world in all these major cities is pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful initiative. Just to end on, what do you think the audience, which will probably be, architects, early careers architects and other people in design, what do you think they could take away from your journey in architecture? What are those sort of key lessons?
I'm not sure anyone should learn anything from me, but I will say the one thing is like, don't be in a hurry, right? Like, and it goes back to this, like, you gotta get comfortable with delayed gratification. Don't be in a hurry to get a drawing set out. Don't be in a hurry to get a rendering out. Don't be in a hurry to build too many buildings. That the profession is a battle of attrition, right? And don't set out to be anything other than to build your building, one building at a time. And then, because it'll happen anyway, right? Like, particularly at firms like KPF, where they're multi-generational and things are always moving, society's always moving, culture inside the firm always moving. Just focus on being the best version of the architect that you want to be. And remember that there isn't one type of architect, just as there isn't one doctor, or one lawyer. We're in a professional services business There's lots of ways to be an architect, and get comfy with the kind of architect you want to be, and really don't spend your life worrying about work-life balance. Spend your life becoming the kind of architect that you want to be. Um, and just remember that. And if you feel yourself getting pulled into Macau and a life of casino facades in River Delta, like, don't be afraid to make a change,
Yeah.
like, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's your first job, not your last job. It's your second job, not your second to last job. Like, you can course correct, but just remember that the profession attempts to move you towards specialization. And so if you feel yourself being moved, whether you're in a 5-person firm or a 500-person firm, if you feel yourself being moved into a specialized thing that you don't want, you have to change. You have to make the change, because a culture like KPF or the AIA or any kind of anything is never going to care more about your career than you. And ultimately, you're responsible for becoming the kind of architect you want to be. So I would just say be like super attentive to that over the long run, the long, medium run. And as you build out these portfolio buildings, and that's my advice to someone who wants to build buildings. Of course, there are architects who never build buildings either. And that's also great and serves a solid purpose. I would like to see the profession as a whole. Like, I am concerned about the state of the profession. And I watched in this country in particular what happened to mechanical engineers with like lowering fees and lowering scope of services, and kind of like a cannibalization of that particular profession, and a downgrading of the quality of the deliverables and things and the fees. And I am concerned that the same thing could happen to the profession of architecture too, if we're all not careful. And so I do want to make sure, and I think the partners at KPF, we all feel like a real responsibility to pull the profession up as much as we can to make sure that it exists 50 years from now, 40 years from now. There's, our cities are under siege politically, economically, societally. Our profession is under siege from those same things. And so it's not a foregone conclusion that our profession exists 50 years from now. So we all have kind of an obligation to each other and to future generations to do the right thing once we get into these positions where we can build good buildings, charge good fees, and make sure we're building a profession, not we're in a profession, but that we're building a profession that society needs. So that goes back to conversation about like affordable housing or whatever, it's resiliency, sustainability, like all these huge crushing issues that I do feel that architects should be a bigger part of solving.
Completely. Yeah.
Professionally.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Just lastly, on reflection, because we've been doing a lot of reflection, so your career, has it turned out how you imagined? Was there a plan, or is it intentional? Is it just adaptation? And how much of that course correction that you alluded to earlier have you done yourself, sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you had asked like 18-year-old me, I guess I would have thought I would be writing books on architecture. And if you had asked like 24-year-old me, I'd probably think I'd be like working on airports. And then I think if you had asked me, 26-year-old me, I probably would have thought I would have been like somehow had my own business, So my career has been roughly adjacent to what I set out to do. It's certainly been like infinitely more satisfying than I ever imagined it could be. So in that respect, like I'm just very grateful to have been able to work on the projects I've worked on, to work with the people at KPF that I worked with, to work with the clients. Like one of the great things about KPF is you have great clients too, right? So you're learning from great professionals in real estate business. So in that sense, maybe I've like overachieved and like I sort of feel like just grateful in all those ways. Of course, like when you're in the middle of the trenches of running a global design firm together with your partners, it feels like everything's going wrong. It feels like just the wheels are coming off and all this stuff. And, you're jealous of your other people's building and you're unhappy with your building. And, but that's the state of being an architect, right? Is like looking up at your building and seeing a mistake and knowing you'll do better next time. So I think in the midst of a career, it feels like you still got so many problems to deal with and so much buildings you have to get right. But I guess just reflecting on it, I'm like extremely glad that I stuck with it. Extremely glad. And I just go back to just lastly, like that, like sitting as an undergraduate, typing away on my thesis, never imagining, the internet. Like, I mean, you start your career wanting to be an architect without the internet, in the middle of it, and you've got like more processing power in your phone. Your client has more access to you than you'd ever imagined you would be. So the profession definitely keeps you young. Like I think of like my very first like summer job. My dad was like, if you really want to be an architect, go work for this guy. And I like went to like Orlando, Florida, and the guy had this like May line and he's up and down. I'm like drawing. That guy went out of business because he didn't use AutoCAD. And then the client, the company I worked for in Hong Kong, like they didn't go from AutoCAD to Revit. They went out of business. And it's like, now it's like we're in AI. It's like, you got to use it. You got to find a way to use it. You got to use the new technology. You have to adapt, but just try to do it in a way that propels not only your practice forward and you as an individual forward, but the whole profession forward. Yeah. And that's the thing I think we haven't as a profession globally gotten our head around quite yet. Is like, how are we going to make these new tools work for us and work for societies, because there's so much work to do to make society better.
Thank you so much for joining me forth. I mean, just a fascinating conversation and a wonderful reflection on your career. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.